Hello, James Ruzicka here at the popcorn counter.
Hello, Andres Lorente. What a pleasure to see you.
I'm happy to see you too, but I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's some dude nearby with headphones and a very large, long microphone right over our heads. What is going on?
I assume that he just follows you around all the time, does he not?
I wish, because I always say such interesting things and they go unrecorded. Oh, wait a second. Michael Primmer, is that you?
Why, hello.
Do believe Michael Primmer, friend of the pod. What a pleasure to see you again. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Great to see both of you.
Michael Primmer is an old friend of the pod and a masterful location sound audio man here visiting us today on the Two Reel Cinema Club. We're at the popcorn counter and we've got a special guest and we want to talk mostly about A Prairie Home Companion, I think. James, would you agree on that? Do you want to?
I'm quite aware that Mike has recorded sound for literally hundreds of well-known feature films. But one of them was the film that we watched last week, Prairie Home Companion. So thrilled though I am to talk to you about any of the many masterpieces that you've been associated with. Prairie Home Companion is at the front of our minds.
So we're going to ask you hundreds of questions about a film that you made almost 20 years ago. So I'm sure your memory is up to the task here.
Yeah, it's actually an actual lifetime ago.
Yeah.
That I did
half
this.
a career ago or something. Yeah.
Yes, my son was born 6 months, let's say closer to 9 months, after we shot this movie.
Ooh.
Whoa.
Oh.
So
he's really tied to this film in that way.
Yes. He was
9 months after. Yep. And it was shot in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, yeah, in lovely St. Paul, Minnesota.
And did your wife come visit you while you were working on the film at any time? I know she does that sometimes.
She did. We were set up nicely St. Paul's a great little town, and they gave me a nice little apartment. Nice. And we shot in the theater. Well, you see it in the movie. That's the theater where Prairie Home Companion would always do their actual show. And it was a couple of miles away from my apartment. I would some days ride a bicycle over to set and a couple of days walk. Yeah, it was a lovely time. It gets quite hot.
Have you watched the film recently? And you knew you were going to be on the pod, did you?
No, sadly, I've been a little bit busy this past week, so I wasn't able to rewatch it. So it's been a little while since I've seen it. Because
we were going to talk about it a little bit. We've already talked about it from the story side and the film side. So do you have any impressions that you can recall? Like I remember the film. I remembered it quite well, considered my memory is starting to fail a little bit, but I remembered it very much the way I experienced it again recently. Do you have any impressions of the film when you saw it?
You mean how did I feel about it when I saw it? Well, I think it's a really interesting film because I was a fan of the radio show, and obviously that's the targeted audience.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're hoping to bring in others, but that's a built-in audience, and you go to watch the film, and it gives you a little bit of the film, but it's a bit more and it's a bit less at the same time than the radio show. And I didn't really sense that until I saw the finished version to really appreciate it for what that is. But I think it's a really interesting film in that way because it sort of gives you a little bit of the feeling of being at the actual show, but it's also kind of about this little drama this fictional drama taking place during the course of the show.
I mean, we both kind of came away with the overriding impression that when the film really sings, no pun intended, although this turns out to be a terrible
intentional
pun. I love a pun.
Yeah.
It's as a concert movie. And the musical numbers really elevate it. And then the kind of the drama that happens in between the musical numbers feels slightly less convincing. And there are scenes which almost feel like they're mixing together characters from different films,
right?
And don't really have that same kind of unified sort of tone.
Yeah.
But the musical numbers, I think, are truly outstanding.
Yeah. And the mishmash really works on radio. I mean, I'm in the same place. Especially in 2006, I was a massive fan of Prairie Home Companion. Used to listen to it every Saturday, basically. And the mishmash works on radio, and I don't think it works the same way in film. So I think that's
right.
It definitely affected as the built-in audience. It definitely affected the way I saw the film.
Right, because he's trying to give you the mishmash of characters from an insider's point of view, but also an outsider's point of view at the same time, I think.
Yeah.
And I agree that sometimes it doesn't quite hold up. Some of the storylines are a little weaker than others. And you're right, the musical performances really hold the film, elevate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's an enjoyable confection. I think. Yeah. I having never seen it before, I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. And were you how familiar with the radio show were you?
Not at all. It doesn't exist in the UK.
Okay.
It's not something that happens at all. I was aware of Garrison Keillor insofar as I had bought his book Lake Wobegon Days, like 20 years ago or whatever, and read that. So he was a figure known as a writer, as a comic writer. Not a million miles away from Bill Bryson,
right,
in the UK,
right.
But as a radio personality, not at all. I was amazed to read this week that he was the guy who did the voice for the Honda adverts that were kind of everywhere about 15, 20 years ago. And it was only watching the film this week that I realised, I recognise his voice. He did do those Honda Power of Dreams ads, but that's about as far as his kind of media personality extended into the UK.
Well, he truly does have a gifted radio voice. Mm-hmm. Almost.
And a radio face. We talked about the radio face.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think, what's the line? A face.
Face for radio.
Face for radio, yeah.
Could we start talking about the musicianship? I think, because I'm very interested in that. Like, in terms of, I don't know, I assume there was a couple of different recording crews to capture music and dialogue. But we're both very interested to know, like, if the songs needed to be re-recorded, if things like if Woody Harrelson and John C. Reilly were playing guitars, because they're kind of framed out of the shots. So basically, anything you can give us for insight about the musicianship on the shoot. Well,
it's interesting. Just before joining this pod, I happened to have a chat with my friend Drew, who was the sound mixer on that movie.
Ooh, and we should say the sound is exceptional on this film. That's the other thing, is that we were both blown away by the sound, considering how complex it was. So.
It's interesting. It was very complex. At the end of the day, it sort of came together in a rather simple way compared to the way things are typically done, certainly now, because things can be very complex. And I'll see if I can explain what I mean. But Drew shared with me today, which I don't know if he had told me this before, but in pre-production meetings with Bob, the director,
I love that, Bob. Carry on.
He had previously done a musical film, Kansas City, about jazz,
right?
And Nashville too.
And Nashville as well, but particularly with Kansas City, because that was more recent.
Yeah.
Right. He said to Drew, on that film, the sound department and post-production sound department prior to shooting really laid down the rules for, okay, you want to do this complicated film, but here's the deal. We want to make this a recording to be released as a soundtrack on its own. And therefore they really put strict guidelines onto what he could and couldn't do in terms of the interplay between the music and the dialogue. And specifically because they did indeed have a separate crew come in for the music recordings, to record them as a live album, And it was a much more complicated deal to try to then have dialogue interplay over that while they're playing live.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he really said that he wanted to avoid that as much as possible. That frustrated him no end, and he didn't want to do that with this film. So how can we do it live? And so Drew said, "Okay, let's explore that. See if we can make that happen." And one of the first things he did was he then asked the sound mixer who does the radio show to get involved in the film, because up to that point they weren't involved. It was sort of a separate entity. Okay, here's the sound crew to make the movie. You're going to do what you need to do to record the sound for the film. And Drew realized, like, they have a regular crew week in, week out recording this show with all the musical performances on stage and we're shooting in the exact same place where they already are set up and doing this. So he said, we need to involve them in this. So the way we set it up doing was that we hired the local crew that does the musical recordings for the show to set up and do their standard procedure, record it, and then we brought in an additional recording. At that point, it was a computer, and recorded what they do. Normally, they do it live and would mix it down to a stereo recording, which would then be sent off for broadcast. So we had him set up in the same way, but we took the isolated outputs. He'd still recorded his normal broadcast in stereo, but for safety's sake, we recorded isolated elements of everything he was doing on stage on this new computer system, which incidentally we hadn't used before.
So you took it out of their desk rather than setting up your own mics, your own system.
Well, yes, that for everything on stage, for everything musical on stage, we used their normal setup. And then to add a layer on top of that, there were clearly going to be scenes where actors or performers are having dialogue off stage, walking right on stage, and the song begins, or maybe the song has already begun, and they go right into singing and performing. So what we did is we set up our normal film recording setup. And in this case, at that point, multi-track for location sound recording it's advanced quite a bit since then. So at the time, he had a recorder that would do 8 tracks of isolated recording, and plus a stereo mix-down track. So he actually used 2 of those, which gave him 16. In addition to everything on the stage. So what we did is we had a couple of boom mics, some what we call plant mics when they were needed or useful, which are usually stationary microphones, like a boom mic, but hidden on set somewhere. Right. And then in addition to that, then we would have all the actors wearing wireless microphones. And those were set up to capture the dialogue. So all of this... we used time code to sync all the different recording devices. So then when you see the scenes in which there's anything happening on stage, we had both of those systems set up and running in parallel to each other, right? And then it would just be dependent on the shot. What is it that we want to hear? And then Drew, he would actually do a live mix. Principally, you would do this, what we say for dailies, like you're making a mix in the moment, so that when they watch the takes back afterwards, they have a good reference. But that mix that's made live is almost entirely redone later in post-production. This is just like a reference mix. But as long as you capture all the pieces, all the elements isolated, they can redo everything. So what he would do is he would take a feed from the stage soundboard, and he would have that available to add to his mix. So when he was mixing it for the director's headphones on the day, and then that's what they would watch when we would watch dailies, he would bring up what was most important. Okay, it's the dialogue. Maybe there's some music happening. Right. I'm going to mix in a little bit of music, but we want to hear the dialogue. That's what's important. And he would be using in some cases, it might be the boom microphone, or maybe it's their wireless microphones that they're wearing. And then they walk out on stage and he crossfades out of all of that into the house mix. By the house mix, I mean the from the stage. So at that point, then he was relying on that person who did a great job. I mean, it sounds just like it does when they did the radio show. Yeah. And it was always taught. I mean, unfortunately, James, you never, you didn't grow up listening to this, but I mean, it was always top notch as far as live music performance on the radio.
Yep.
Great sound, great performances, but great sound.
It really reminds me of what I think is probably my favorite single moment in the whole film, which is, fairly early on, before they start the show, Garrison Keillor is telling some ridiculous, stupid story about a chicken. And Maya Rudolf is kind of saying, we're about to start the show, let's get you on stage. And he's still telling the story about the chicken. And he's still telling the story about the chicken to her. She walks away and the curtains come up.
Yep.
And the curtain is kind of at about his shoulder level, but he's still telling the chicken story. Then he just turns into the mic, and the band has already started playing, and he just turns to the mic and says, "Welcome to the show." Whatever. It's a really lovely, enjoyable moment.
Yeah.
And one of those moments is obviously an utter nightmare to record and mix.
Yeah. So what's unusual about the way we did things, and that I think actually does help elevate the experience when you're watching it, is that everything is live. None of that was overdubbed.
Oh wow!
So like typically when you're making a movie and you're having someone talking, you have the band just miming.
Yeah.
Right. And often to make it look accurate, they might be wearing little tiny earpieces where they can hear the music, and so when they're miming in sync to what to make it look real. So in most cases it can be done quite well. I mean, we've all seen when it's been done poorly, but especially nowadays it can be done really well. You typically don't notice someone playing out of sync nowadays very much, but I do think you hear there's like an intangible element that's missing that makes it feel alive and real. And that was the thing that the director was really wanting and craving. He wanted the reality at the cost of quality, much like he got when he made Nashville. He really wanted a live performance. He wanted you to have that experience, that feeling. And he was famous for having actors talk all over each other because he wanted to make it sound real. So he didn't care if they were overlapping. And in fact, he, because of that style, he really led the direction of getting multi-track recording during live film shoots.
Mm-hmm.
So to be clear, when we watch Meryl Streep and Lily Tomlin sing a song with the whole band, they are actually singing, and we are hearing the sound that they are making in the moment. They are not. It's not post-sync kind of. They're not miming to an earlier recording.
Yes,
it's the real deal.
100%.
Wow.
Now we would do multiple takes.
Yeah. Okay.
Not very many. Yeah. That's the other thing is he didn't like to do. He's not a director who wants to do a lot of takes. If we shot one take and he thought it was good, he's happy to move on, which is also which is scary and nightmarish for everyone else because you feel like, oh no, there's that one little thing that wasn't quite right, but so the musical performances I couldn't say for sure how many takes we did, but not very many. So it is possible that maybe from shot to shot there is cutting from different takes. That is possible.
Okay.
I wasn't involved in the editing process, but I do know that they didn't re-record any of that in terms of the audio.
Mm. Now, I am very aware that you work with David Fincher, so it may well be true that to you, not many takes is 50 takes. But
Yes. Thankfully, Mr. Altman prefers less than 10.
right, okay.
On the main pod, we talked about a show-off sequence where there are all these mirrors in the dressing room, and Meryl Streep and Lily Tomlin are talking. Lindsay Lohan's there, and they're just mirrors everywhere. They're all holding mirrors. They're sitting in front of mirrors. And it's sort of this show-off scene where, Robert Altman can do this. And I just, hearing you talk about some of those sound sequences, I feel like the sound people do these show-off things too, where Robert Altman puts you in this position where you have to really do something super complicated, and they don't get recognized in nearly the same way. Because it's a sound thing, not so many viewers are not listening with wide open ears and realizing how tremendous that scene is where Garrison Keillor's telling this story in one room, and he's telling it right up until the moment he's standing in front of this microphone and starting the radio show. So there's a lot of outstanding work, and I think that the sound work is probably underappreciated as a result.
Yeah, it certainly was tricky, and it's interesting that you bring up that scene with them in the dressing room for a couple of reasons. One is that I think he's done this in several other films. I'm not sure if all of them, but he loves reflections. So he purposely, there was a lot of time spent getting those mirrors in the right place.
Yeah.
And the blocking of it. And the funny story behind that scene is that's actually the first thing we shot in the movie.
Wow.
And initially, that scene, if I recall, it starts with Garrison. I don't know if he's talking to someone, but he comes down the stairs and then enters their dressing room. Mm-hmm. And they're there, and he talks to them for a bit, and then he goes away, and then they continue talking, and then maybe one or two other people come in at some point. And the whole thing is about 9 pages long. And that was originally scheduled to be shot over the course of 2 days.
Wow.
And that's still, even for a film, that's quite a bit of work to get done in 2 days.
Yeah.
And so going into it, the line producer and producer, they were, and certainly the first AD, they had some concerns, like, we've scheduled it this way, but there's a little bit of time. We might be able to fudge on the third day. We could squeeze in a little bit more if we don't quite get it done, and they were really concerned about starting off the whole movie, because this is also not a big budget movie. So there wasn't a lot of time or money for overages. Yeah. So on the very first day, we go in to shoot that, and I think we spent an hour. I was just talking to Drew about this, but I think we spent about an hour or so doing the first piece, which was Garrison coming down the stairs and coming into the dressing room, and we got that shot, or a couple of shots, I guess it was. And then once that was completed, he then spent about 2 hours rehearsing and blocking the next portion, which was the real meat of the scene of them in the dressing room. Right. And, we were waiting around for all this to happen. And everyone started, as the longer it goes on, the more concerned we are about the amount of time, and, this is going to take forever. And this is, we're going to have to add an extra day or something. So he finishes the blocking process, and everyone comes in. And at this point, we work it out with the cameras. And we may have had 3 cameras. I'm trying to remember. We had at least 2. And they were tucked away on either side of that dressing room. And then the mirrors were placed. It became quite difficult for me to be anywhere.
Yeah.
And certainly for me physically, but then also, where's the microphone going to be? Is that going to be in the mirror? There were kind of zones where I could put the microphone or be or not be. And then of course all the actors had wireless mics on.
Yeah.
So we kind of figured out how we're going to do this. Then we shot the scene in one take. did one long take of the rest of the scene. All 8.5 pages of it or whatever. And he loved it. That was great. And he's like, he made a couple of tweaks with what they were doing, and then we did another. We may have possibly have done 3 takes. I can't remember. Wow. 2 or 3 takes. So by lunchtime, we had shot all 9 pages, and he was done with the scene.
Wow.
On the first day.
Huh.
And so the producers immediately were like, "Oh, this isn't." Everyone was astonished. Like, how could we possibly be done?
Yeah.
There's no way. But he felt he captured it all, and the producers were thinking, "Oh, this is great. We've got an extra day for the film. What are we going to do?" And his response was, "Well, let's take the day off." I messed with the schedule. So we did come in on the second day, but all we did was rehearse the musical numbers. We didn't shoot anything on the second day.
My.
So after the first day, we were 2 days, almost 2.5 days ahead of schedule.
Whoa!
That's tremendous. And it's not. There wasn't a lot of rehearsing beforehand. It's just that they nailed it in the course of setting it up and doing it.
Right. Wow. Yeah, he didn't like to rehearse much. I'm not sure if I know they did a cast read through.
Yeah.
Probably a few times, but I don't think he did any extensive rehearsals with the actors prior to shooting.
That's so counterintuitive to me, is seeing all these long takes, that they weren't rehearsed a lot. But that's the power of a good director, I suppose. Right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it was the blocking.
Yeah.
That 2 hours. So he trusted in them to know the material.
Yeah.
And to bring their performance to it. So he just needed to make sure that the blocking was such that he was getting it from the camera positions that he could get.
Yeah.
I mean, bear in mind that the camera couldn't, even though there was more than one camera, they couldn't see each other either directly or in the mirror also. So that was, it was tricky.
Wow.
Wow.
So am I right? So is the whole film shot on location? That dressing room is actually downstairs in the actual Fitzgerald Theatre.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, everything on location.
And like the corridors, and they're like the little reception desk that Kevin Kline sits behind, and the office and everything, all of that, and then backstage, it's all inside you.
Yeah, that was out front. I'm trying to. It's like I said, it's been a while since I've seen the film. There are a few other locations. The diner is down the street, and we were. But I don't know. I want to say like 75% of the film was shot in the Fitzgerald Theatre.
Wow,
something like that. I mean, it was quite a bit.
Well, I remember,
but nothing in a studio per se.
I remember when we talked. You were in Minnesota, and we talked at one point, and you said that they basically set up this crane on a dolly, and everything was more or less shot that way. Like that was in the audience somehow, or in the aisle of the auditorium. I mean, normally you'd think they might have ripped out all these seats and they're just, using all the space they can, but it sounded like they just set up this crane and then they just shot much of it using that crane. Yeah,
I think that's the type of theater that has a center aisle.
Okay.
Right down the middle of the theater, from the back of the house to the stage. And so that's where they set up the track. And then the camera was hoisted out. The crane is on the dolly, and then the camera floated out over the seats to get some of those positions. And then there was a second camera, positioned elsewhere to get the cross coverage or whatnot.
Yeah. But like shooting kind of backstage, I've been backstage in a bunch of theatres, and there's not a lot of room backstage generally. The wings are not roomy places,
right?
And to be able to fit, not just the actors, but the camera crew and the sound and everything in those little confined spaces, that's hard.
It is hard, but also not. I mean, wherever we were shooting, not everyone would necessarily be like backstage or in the wings. There would be the set, and the actors would be there, and then the camera would be in its position wherever that would be, and maybe it's moving or not, and then there I would have to find a place for me to be, but otherwise, the sound mixing desk is not in that space. That, in fact, I think for most of it, Drew was set up out in the audience, often maybe even at the back, and that would just run long cables or antennas to wherever the shooting was, and then the director's setup, he had a whole, his monitors where he's watching, he was set up kind of in almost the same place the whole time. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
And then long cables. So that took a bit of setup too, because that's typically the way it's done on any shoot. Everyone will be set up out of the area where you're shooting, but in this case, they tried to make it so that the director's monitor station was set up and was there like in the same place for 90% of the time.
Right.
And so if we were shooting downstairs in the basement, they would just have to run extra long cables all the way down to the basement. Because once he got back by the monitors to watch what was happening, he didn't move much from there. At this point in his life, he was limited as far as his mobility. Mm-hmm. And the other thing was he also was limited in terms of his stamina over the course of the day.
Right.
Yeah.
So we didn't have very long days either. And there were definitely times when I felt like, we're wrapping early. That's great, but I'm not sure if we got it.
Yeah.
But I think it, for the most part, he did get it. I just, another director might do another few takes. Part of that's his style, and part of it was he was tired and ailing and needed to go home. So,
yeah. And does Drew have a monitor in the other room where he can watch? The sound recorders can
yes.
actually. Okay.
Oh
so
yeah.
He's seeing it as well.
Yeah, and typically the sound mixer will have multiple screens so they can see each of the cameras and in each angle what they're looking at. Because that makes a big difference. Because otherwise, you're flying blind.
Yeah, exactly.
And if and especially a long sequence when actors are going on and off camera, or maybe the actor doesn't come in until 6 pages into the scene. Well, that person's mic, their wireless mic doesn't need to be turned on, or it'll be turned on, but it won't be faded up in the mix until they come on camera or until they speak. So in that case, having the monitor is essential, because then, you can, when I'm on set, I can say to the sound mixer, I can say, okay, such and such character comes through the door and then walks over by the mirror, and then they say their first line. So they have that visual cue, and they know, like, as they're mixing, they're also watching what's happening on camera, and they can see that character come in, and they know when to fade up the microphone before they're going to say that line. Or, so it's a pretty essential element to, I would say, to a technical element to making movies.
Now, we still haven't been able to tie you down to the $64,000 question, which has already been mooted, and you've cleverly parried it away. We want to know, was Woody Harrelson actually playing the guitar?
My recollection is that he wasn't a strong guitar player, and that
this is Mike the Diplomat coming out now. Okay,
yeah. I'm pretty sure he knew some chords, but I don't think he played as strongly as I think Charles C. Reilly played.
Oh wow! Okay,
like pretty well. That's my right. They are definitely 100% singing.
Right. Okay,
but they're playing. There is another guitar player in the band.
Yeah.
Ah, right.
So,
okay, yeah.
So what we're hearing, and again, I'd have to rewatch it and listen. But I think one of them or both of them were probably playing the opening chords to the song on the acoustic before the band kicks in, that kind of thing.
And those really big microphones that they appear to be singing into, are those the actual microphones that we are listening through?
Yes. That took a bit of research too, because he wanted a big microphone that would look sort of period, even though this film is, it's sort of not really determined when this film is taking place. It seems kind of present day, but there's sort of but he definitely wanted an oldsy timesy feel.
Right.
So we did do a bit of research trying to find some microphones that would look older, even if they weren't older. Which is how, you mentioned the blue microphone earlier, Andres. That's how I first came in contact with the blue microphones, because they sent us a few to demo that looked quite cool, and I was like, oh, you should use this one. And I'd have to rewatch it to remember which ones we used for like, say, the Cowboys, for instance. But Garrison's microphone is a real microphone that we sourced. I don't remember. There was also the possibility. There was one instance where we had an empty shell of a microphone, and we inserted a better quality capsule in it. But I don't remember if that's the one we actually used or not.
No, his microphone does sound absolutely fantastic. It just makes everything he says sound so syrupy and beautiful.
Yeah, but the Blue Yeti is a good microphone too, and it's an unofficial sponsor of the Two Wheel Cinema Club.
Oh yes, very solid microphone, and thanks to them, because, like I said, they sent us a few samples of their products, and we enjoyed them.
We really should burn these guys for sponsorship. We really should, shouldn't we? I have one other. Speaking of burning, I have one other burning question, which I am desperate to ask you.
Yeah.
So when you're setting up the sound for the movie, I'm guessing you are actually putting your microphones. Was it body mics? What do you call that little microphone that people wear on their body?
We refer to them as body mics. They're called lavalier microphones.
Okay,
is the actual term for the microphone. A small microphone that you would clip on some, like a newscaster would wear,
right, okay.
Or something like that.
Is that a brand name though, or is that the Band-Aid of the adhesive bandage world? Or
no. Lavalier is a term like it's a term like dynamic or hypercardioid or any other kind of microphone term. Okay. Or I would say it's more of a term like shotgun microphone, which isn't a brand name, but it describes a design.
Right.
The design of the actual microphone.
Got it.
So you were putting lavalier microphones on the cast. So you are probably better qualified than anybody else I know to say whether Maya Rudolf was actually pregnant at the time. Was that her real abdomen?
That was.
Whoa!
There was. I don't know if there was concern. I was a little concerned. Like, oh, she's pregnant. Is this okay to be, to be working these long hours and whatnot?
Yeah.
But she did well. I mean, fortunately, I think I don't recall there ever being a day when she had to work super long. Her scenes are relatively contained.
Yeah.
And as you know, her partner, her husband, was on set every day as well. So should there be an emergency need, he was nearby, which was handy.
So her husband. Now, am I right? Is Paul Thomas Anderson?
That's correct.
Her husband.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And what was he doing then when he was on set? Was he just there in case like a backup that was needed?
Yeah, officially he was brought in, I believe, by the Bond company.
Okay.
Dictated we need to have someone available, a qualified director, to take over as if needed to make sure the film gets done. Because Bob was in failing health, and so there was concern with, like by the investors, if we're putting all this money in, we need the guarantee that the product will be finished.
Right.
So he was brought in officially under that. He was, but he was he had a good relationship with him, and so he was around pretty much. My recollection, he was around the whole time, sort of conferring and available to talk about shots as Bob would need or want, and share some ideas as needed. He kept a fairly low profile, I would say, generally. I mean, Altman is a very big personality, and even in his later stages, he still brought a lot. So when he spoke, I mean, he's also quite funny, but he commands the ship for sure. But there were a couple of days, one in particular that I remember, it probably happened more than once, where Bob needed to leave for a medical appointment, not an emergency, but more of a routine, and Paul would take over and finish out the day finish directing the scene
interesting.
or something. Yeah, it happened once or twice, I think.
So you had future newborn children and a very old and ailing director on the same set.
Indeed.
The whole breadth of the life cycle.
And then another little nugget is that on that film, my friend and boss, Drew, the sound mixer, we both met the production designer of the job, and he and she have been married pretty much. They've been together ever since.
Oh, my.
Aww.
Oh, my. What a great story. A good film for you.
Yes.
I am going to widen the conversation very slightly, only now that I've got you here. So you are broadcasting live from California? You're in Los Angeles?
I'm in Berkeley.
Berkeley, right. Okay, right. So only because I have read an awful lot recently about how dire the California film industry is this year.
Indeed.
And I was just going to ask you, what's your experience been this year? Have you found that, are people shooting abroad or shooting further out east or just not shooting at all?
It's a complicated answer, I guess. It's funny because a couple of weeks ago, I listened to a podcast of two gentlemen standing by a popcorn counter or something like that, and they were talking about
like very reliable sources of information. Yes,
they were talking about how the industry is decimated and falling, and it was kind of depressing to listen to it, frankly.
We needed numbers. We needed listeners, so you got to be exciting and drastic.
But in answer to your question, it is very slow. It's very different and very uncertain.
Okay.
There's still quite a bit of episodic production taking place.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't think of the numbers off the top of my head, but my recollection from recent reports is it's at 60%.
Oof.
Wow.
Right now. But in talking with people recently, I feel that the number in feature films are down even more so. I was about to say dramatically, but that sounds like
that's good. We started with puns.
Unintendedly.
I'm happy to stick with that.
People say no pun intended when they mean I intend to make this pun. Right?
Yes. But yeah, that's they're down dramatically, and but my understanding is that there are a number of things being readied for the new year, 2025. So people are feeling hopeful. There is the general concern of production taking place outside of the country or moving outside of the country.
Right. Yep.
But what's interesting is just this past week, I was working with a British sound mixer.
Oh, very good.
And we were working, he's working on a very big budget, high profile movie that's being shot kind of in multiple locations around the world. And California just is one of several locations. So I'm working with him just on this portion of the film, but he made it sound like there's a lot of things leaving the UK as well. Whereas it was my understanding that things were booming there. So it's hard to say. I mean, they're definitely, I think post-pandemic, there was a massive just rush of production, and the streaming services just throwing loads of money into creating, like, as they say, content. So much so that it took, things dipped, of course, during the pandemic, and then it swung back wildly the other direction to a point that wasn't sustainable, coinciding with a couple of labor strikes that sort of slowed things down. And now there's this massive sort of correction, this period of correction. So nobody's really quite sure how that's going to play out.
So is it possible that the 60% figure is like it's more like things getting back to normal, rather than it being a contraction?
I don't know if 60% is where we were at before. I mean, again, this is conjecture. I'm just going to throw numbers out, but imagine whatever the 100% was, we were at before the pandemic.
Right.
And things dropped off post-pandemic, then it went up to like 120% or 130%. And now we're back at 60 or 70% of what was normal. You know what I mean? I think that the correction, where we're at right now is not where we were before the pandemic.
Right. Shucks.
And so we'll see. We'll see. Certainly the nature of, I mean, part of that you can tell just by you look at the number of movie theaters that are closing.
Oh no.
Which is sad to say. There's, so as you both pointed out in your podcast, that it could be a big part of it, the nature of the way people are consuming the product. And so that's going to, of course, affect how it's being made.
At least some theatres are still open. So there is a contraction of theatre in the UK, actually. I think Cineworld fairly recently announced they were shutting 40% of their screens, something like that. So there is a danger of contraction in exhibition in the UK. But I tell you what's not contracted in exhibition, Interstellar is returning to theatres like next month or this month, I think.
Yeah, I did see that. There's some kind of anniversary. I don't know what the number is. Is it 10 years?
I think it's 10 years. Yeah, I think it's 10 years. So there is still an audience for excellently well recorded feature films.
Yes. You still have a long career ahead of you for sure.
I was kind of hoping they would do a remix prior to exhibition, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But I did see. I made note of that as well, the re-release, and it does make me want to reconsider that film, perhaps rewatch it again, see what.
Yeah, I would quite like to take my children to see it. I wasn't an enormous fan of Interstellar when we saw it first time around, but 10 years on, maybe it'd be worth revisiting actually with more realistic expectations. So I don't know. Have you had a copy of the script for the new Christopher Nolan and Tom Holland picture yet?
No.
Shucks. But then, I bet if you had received the script, you would still have to tell us no, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm going to say that's yes.
No. I mean, had I seen it, I could say I've seen it, and I can't tell you about it. I could say that. But no, I have not been. I have not been invited into the office to have a read of it. In advance, prior to shoot. I don't know if I probably told you this. Prior to shooting Interstellar, in order for me to read the script, I had to go into the office at Warner Brothers to where they're set up, and leave. I don't know what I left, my driver's license, something at the desk, and then get a copy of it, and not take my phone with me, and go in and sit and read the script, and then hand it back to them.
Whoa!
It was very.
And I really like to think that they printed a lot of the dialogue in really, really tiny letters and then rubbed them out with their thumb.
No, it was all written on a dry erase board. No, I'm just kidding. No.
I hate to bring this up, but we've got to go watch this movie that we're waiting for here at the popcorn counter.
And we have got our popcorn, and it's cooling down as we speak.
It's cold. But at least now that I know that the man lurking over us with a microphone is friendly.
Always friendly.
Maybe he'll come back to the popcorn counter someday.
Well, if we offer to buy him popcorn, he might.
Yeah, if they're still making popcorn, I will come.
If there's still a theatre, then you will come. Yes. Okay, yeah, brilliant. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
Happy to see you both.
Thank you for coming back and enlightening us and adding a lot of great character to that the story of Prairie Home Companion and your entire career. We wish you well.
Thank you. I'll see you next time, I guess.
Absolutely. We're right here at the popcorn counter.
See you next time. Looking forward to it.